A German fighter pilot, blood streaming down his face from a head wound, hands his father's Iron Cross to the British medic, who moments before had been trying to shoot him down. This isn't fiction. This actually happened on a beach in France, where 400,000 Allied soldiers were trapped and dying. The year is 1940, and you're standing on the sand at Dunkirk. Abandoned tanks and rifles litter the beach like broken toys. Black smoke from burning fuel dumps chokes the air. Behind you stretches the entire British Army, every trained soldier. Britain has trapped with their backs to the English Channel. German artillery pounds closer from three sides. Luftwaffe bombers circle overhead like vultures. Every military expert in the world knows this is the end of Britain's ability to fight Nazi Germany. Churchill himself estimates they might save 45,000 men if they're extremely lucky. The mathematics of war are brutal and simple. Lose the army here, lose the war. But here's the spine-tingling truth. Over the next 9 days, something happened that defied every law of military strategy, every prediction of the experts, and every assumption about what ordinary people are capable when everything is on the line. Welcome back to War Stories by the Campfire. I'm glad you're here with us tonight. Get comfortable, maybe grab a warm drink, and let's travel back to May 1940, to a moment that changed the course of World War II forever. Before we begin, I'd love to know. Drop a comment below and tell me where you're watching from. It's amazing to connect with all of you from around the world. The year is 1940, and Hitler's war machine has been steamrolling across Europe with terrifying efficiency. In just 6 weeks, the German Wehrmacht has done what they couldn't accomplish in 4 years during the First World War. They've broken through French defenses and are racing toward the English Channel. The British Expeditionary Force, along with French and Belgian troops, find themselves in what military historians call a cauldron, completely surrounded by German forces near the small French port town of Dunkirk. Lord Gort, commander of the British forces, sends a grim message to London. Have to beach or lose the lot. Winston Churchill, Britain's new Prime Minister, faces an impossible choice. These aren't just numbers on a casualty report. This is Britain's entire professional army. If they're lost, Britain will have virtually no trained soldiers left to defend the homeland against the inevitable German invasion. On May 26, 1940, Operation Dynamo begins, named after the Dynamo room in Dover Castle. Where it was planned, this evacuation seems hopeless from the start. The Royal Navy estimates they might save 45,000 men if they're extremely lucky. But here's where our story takes an extraordinary turn. Captain William Tennant arrives at Dunkirk and immediately sees the problem. The harbor has been bombed to rubble, and the sandy beaches are too shallow for destroyers to approach. Men are standing in orderly queues stretching far into the sea, waiting for rescue boats that can barely reach them. Then Tennant spots something: the East Mole, a concrete breakwater that extends deep into the harbor. It wasn't designed as a pier, just a wave break, but it's their only hope. Despite the constant bombing and strafing, he makes a decision that will save thousands of lives. We'll use the mole. Meanwhile, across the English Channel, something remarkable begins to happen. The Admiralty has put out a call for all available vessels between 30 and 100 feet long. What they don't expect is the response. Picture this: Thomas Sopwith, the aviation pioneer, personally captains his yacht. Charles Lytler, the senior surviving officer from the Titanic, yes, that Titanic, takes his 58-foot motor yacht Sundowner across the channel at age 66. A 14-year-old Sea Scout named Andrew Palmer convinces his father to let him help crew their family boat. Fishing boats that have never ventured beyond sight of land suddenly find themselves navigating by compass toward the sound of guns. Weekend pleasure craft designed for quiet river cruising are now dodging German dive bombers. The Luftwaffe isn't making it easy. Stuka dive bombers scream down from the sky, their sirens adding to the terror. Me-109 fighters strafe the beaches, and the men have nowhere to hide on the flat sand. But the RAF is fighting desperately overhead, and though the soldiers can't always see them, they're taking a tremendous toll on the German Air Force. As the days pass, the evacuation takes on an almost surreal quality. On the beaches, men form human piers, standing chest-deep in water to guide boats closer to shore. Some have been waiting for days without food or water, yet discipline holds. When a boat approaches with space for 50 men, only 50 board, even though hundreds are waiting. The little ships work around the clock. The paddle steamer Medway Queen makes 7 trips, earning the nickname the Heroine of Dunkirk. The smallest boat recorded in the evacuation is the 15-foot fishing boat Tomzine, which somehow makes the journey across the channel and back. But it's on the 4th day that we witness perhaps the most extraordinary act of courage in the entire operation. A young fisherman named Tommy Morrison from Ramsgate, just 19 years old, had been making runs in his father's 32-foot fishing boat, the Mary Catherine. On his 7th trip across, loaded with exhausted soldiers, his engine begins to sputter and die just as 3 Stuka dive bombers spot his boat. Tommy realizes he has 2 choices: abandon ship and swim for it, leaving 30 wounded soldiers to drown, or try something desperate. As the first Stuka screams down, Tommy does the unthinkable. He lights a cigarette, stands up in full view of the diving bomber, and begins waving his arms like he's signaling the plane. The German pilot, confused by this brazen display, pulls up at the last second to get a better look. In that split second of hesitation, Tommy dives back to his engine, rips off his shirt, and stuffs it into the carburetor, an old fisherman's trick his grandfather taught him. The engine roars back to life just as the second Stuka begins its dive. Tommy guns the throttle, zigzagging across the water as machine gun bullets churn the sea around them. But here's where the story gets incredible. One of the soldiers on board, Sergeant William Hayes, had been a carnival performer before the war, a knife thrower. As the 3rd Stuka comes in for its attack, Hayes grabs a piece of shrapnel from the deck and, with the timing born of years in the circus, hurls it at the exact moment the plane passes overhead. The metal strikes the pilot's canopy, spiderwebbing the glass just enough to obscure his vision. The Stuka veers off course, its bombs falling harmlessly into the channel. Tommy and his 30 passengers make it safely to Dover, where they're greeted by crowds cheering on the harbor walls. But Tommy Morrison isn't done. Despite his boat being shot full of holes and his hands burned from fixing the engine, he turns around that same afternoon. "These boys are counting on us," he tells the harbor master. "I can't let them down." He makes 3 more trips that day, each time patching new holes with whatever he can find: canvas, wood, even pages torn from a prayer book one of the soldiers gives him. By the time Tommy's war is over, he's rescued 347 men in the Mary Catherine, but he never talks about it afterwards. When reporters tried to interview him years later, he just shrugs and says, "Any fisherman would have done the same. We don't leave people in the water." But perhaps the most profound moment of the entire evacuation comes from an encounter that wasn't supposed to happen at all. On the morning of June 2nd, as the evacuation enters its final days, a lone German fighter pilot named Oberleutnant Klaus Weber crash lands his damaged Messerschmitt on the beach just east of Dunkirk. Weber, barely 22 years old from a small farming village outside Munich, had been shot down during a strafing run and manages to glide his smoking plane onto the sand. As Weber crawls from his wreckage, dazed and bleeding from a head wound, he expects to be immediately captured or shot. Instead, he finds himself face to face with Private Robert Ainsworth, a medic from Yorkshire who had been treating wounded soldiers in a makeshift aid station among the dunes. For a moment, the two young men just stare at each other. Weber, his flight suit torn and his left arm clearly broken, slowly raises his good hand. Ainsworth has his rifle, but something stops him from raising it. Maybe it's the fact that Weber looks barely old enough to shave. Maybe it's the photograph that falls from Weber's torn pocket, a picture of a young woman holding a baby. "Bit," Weber says quietly in German, and switches to broken English. "Please. My arm ... What happens next defies everything both men have been taught about the enemy. Ainsworth sets down his rifle and approaches the wounded German pilot. For the next 20 minutes, in a shell crater on a beach where thousands are fighting for their lives, an English medic tends to a German pilot's wounds with the same care he'd shown his own countrymen. As Ainsworth splints Weber's arm using pieces of driftwood and strips from his own shirt, the two young men begin to talk. Weber speaks some English from his university days. Ainsworth knows a few words of German from a school exchange program before the war. They're both 22. They both have younger sisters. Weber shows Ainsworth the photograph. It's his wife Anna and their 6-month-old son Heinrich, whom he's only seen once on leave. Ainsworth pulls out his own wallet, showing Weber a picture of his fiancée Margaret, whom he was supposed to marry in September before the war started. "Beautiful," Weber says in English, and he means it. But here's where the moment becomes something larger than just two soldiers sharing photographs. As they talk, they realize something that chills them both to the bone. Weber had been flying the Messerschmitt that attacked Tommy Morrison's fishing boat 3 days earlier. He remembers the man who stood up and waved. It had confused him so much he'd pulled out of his dive. "That was ... that was you?" Ainsworth asks because he'd been one of the soldiers on Morrison's boat that day. Weber nods slowly. I could not understand why he stood. So brave, I thought. I thought maybe he was already dead, standing like ghost. They sit in silence for a moment, the weight of how close they'd come to killing each other hanging between them. Finally, Weber reaches into his pocket and pulls out a small metal object, the Iron Cross his father had won in the last war. He hands it to Ainsworth. "For your Tommy Morrison," Weber says. "Such courage. It should be honored, yes? Even by enemy." But their time is running out. German patrols are advancing toward the beach, and British soldiers are calling for Ainsworth to fall back to the evacuation point. Weber struggles to his feet. "You must go," he tells Ainsworth. "They will not understand this," he gestures between them. Ainsworth helps Weber walk toward the German lines, supporting his good arm. At the edge of the dunes, they shake hands. "After war," Weber says, "you come to Germany. You meet Anna and Heinrich. We have good beer, yes?" "After the war," Ainsworth agrees, "you come to Yorkshire. Margaret makes the best Yorkshire pudding in England." They never saw each other again during the war. Weber was later transferred to the Russian front. where he was killed in action in 1943. But Ainsworth kept that Iron Cross through 4 more years of fighting, through D-Day, through the liberation of France, and all the way to Berlin. In 1947, Ainsworth traveled to that small village outside Munich. He found Anna Weber, now a widow trying to raise her son alone in a devastated country. He gave her the Iron Cross and told her about those 20 minutes on the beach when her husband had shown him that even in the middle of hell, 2 human beings could still recognize each other's humanity. Anna Weber kept a letter that Ainsworth wrote to her, which her son Heinrich translated years later. In it, Ainsworth wrote, "Your Klaus wasn't my enemy that day on the beach. He was just another young man far from home, missing his family, hoping to see tomorrow. War makes us forget that our enemies bleed the same color we do, love the same way we do, and dream the same dreams we do." For 20 minutes, we remembered. The most telling moment of the entire evacuation happens on day 6. A group of French soldiers, part of the rear guard holding the perimeter, finally reach the beach. They're exhausted, ammunition spent, expecting to find chaos. Instead, they find British soldiers still in formation, still maintaining order, still helping others board the rescue boats before themselves. By now, something extraordinary is happening. What started as a desperate rescue mission has become something larger, a defiant act of courage that ripples far beyond the beaches of Dunkirk. The German High Command is confident they have the British trapped, but they make a crucial error. Hitler, perhaps wanting to save his tanks for the drive on Paris, orders his ground forces to halt. For 3 precious days, the evacuation continues under pressure from air attacks alone. On the final day, June 4th, the last boat leaves Dunkirk carrying French soldiers who had volunteered to stay behind and hold the line. Captain Tennant, the man who had made the decision to use the East Mole, boards the very last vessel, having personally overseen the evacuation of over 338,000 men. When the numbers are finally tallied, the result is staggering. Instead of the 45,000 men they hoped to save, Operation Dynamo has rescued 338,226 Allied soldiers. The British Expeditionary Force has been saved, and with it, Britain's ability to continue the war. But here's the thing about Dunkirk that makes it more than just a successful military operation. It's what happened next. Those 338,000 men didn't just go home. They became the core of the army that would eventually return to France on D-Day. The RAF pilots who fought so desperately over the beaches went on to win the Battle of Britain. The Royal Navy crews who organized the evacuation would convoy supplies across the Atlantic and land troops in North Africa, Italy, and Normandy. And those little ships? Many of them served throughout the war. The Medway Queen became a floating anti-aircraft battery on the Thames. Sundowner served as a patrol boat. Dozens of fishing boats and pleasure craft spent the next 5 years saving downed airmen, running supplies to resistance fighters, and carrying out covert operations. You see, Dunkirk wasn't really about the evacuation at all. It was about something much larger, the moment when ordinary people decided that some things are worth risking everything for. When a 14-year-old boy and a 66-year-old Titanic survivor found themselves on the same side of history. When fishermen who had never been out of sight of land navigated by the sound of gunfire to save soldiers they'd never met. Churchill called it a miracle, but it wasn't divine intervention that saved those men. It was the decision, made by hundreds of individual people, to sail toward danger instead of away from it. That spirit, that refusal to accept defeat, that willingness of ordinary people to do extraordinary things, that's what won the war. Not just at Dunkirk, but in the skies over Britain, in the factories working around the clock, in the homes that took in evacuees, and eventually on the beaches of Normandy. The hook I started with? Those 400,000 men trapped on a beach with their backs to the sea? They weren't saved by a miracle. They were saved by choice, the choice of their countrymen to come and get them, no matter the cost. So, did you enjoy tonight's story around the campfire? If you did, I'd really appreciate it if you could hit that like button. It's completely free, and it helps us continue putting these stories together for you. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to War Stories by the Campfire. We've got so many more incredible stories of courage, sacrifice, and ordinary people doing extraordinary things. From the frozen forests of the Battle of the Bulge to the jungles of the Pacific, from the home front to the front lines, history is full of moments that remind us what humans are capable of when they stand together. Until next time, keep the fire burning, and remember, we are the inheritors of their courage.